This session. And so following this session, this recording will be available on our website on the professional development page as well. So I'm so glad you're all here for this session. I do want to acknowledge the folks who help us make these kinds of presentations possible. Our partners, our state partners, as you know, South Arts is a regional organization that serves 9 states across the Southeast. And our partners help make this possible. In addition to them making it possible, so does the National Endowment for the Arts. And so I want to give a shout out to those who are helping us fund these types of programs and making them possible. I will be adding some resources into the chat, so feel free to pay attention to that. And then when you want to ask questions, just use the Q&A function. Without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Maida to start the presentation, because that is what you're actually here for, not me rambling on. So welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is a subject that I live with, and it's very close to my heart. And a lot of my work in the last several years has been about helping arts and culture organizations understanding that they do have a role in climate adaptation strategies and are in a position to influence conversations both locally, statewide, and nationally. I'm going to start sharing my screen and get started with the formal presentation. This is what I'm presenting today is from a workshop I've developed over the past several years that was really the workshop that I wish I had when I started dealing with this. So I gradually developed this workshop. And so what I'm presenting today is about 1/4 of what I do in a longer workshop. And I start each one with guiding questions. My core questions is, with climate migration increasing, what should we be doing now? And how can we help communities be ready to better welcome newcomers? I probably don't need to say this to this group, but all culture is passed on through gatherings and education, formally or informally. But with all the disruption that is coming, if there is something that you highly value and you want to make sure is passed on, you will have to do it with intention. Sure, some cultural aspects, and I include the arts in, when I say culture, that includes all of the arts, not just traditional arts. But you need to pass them on with intention. So what can we do to make sure that our sense of place is passed on? Another question I ask is, what do we need, more specifically, is what do we need to be doing now to address the human dimension in planning? My workshops are intended to introduce you to the jargon of the climate conversations within planners. And I got started by basically going around to different agencies and expressing my concern. And one of them said, "Oh, you've identified a gap in the planning. We need to include culture in the community resilience conversation." And at the time, I really didn't know what that meant, but I wrote it down, and I keep reminding myself that that's what I'm trying to do and that we need to do. In the science world, particularly bad problems are called a wicked problem. And climate change is called a super wicked problem. So everyone acknowledges that this is difficult. This is not something that's easy to address. I also want to acknowledge that there are different levels of awareness in the room. And so part of what I try to do is increase everybody's awareness. So you may be familiar with one part, but not another. But for the arts in general to have, participate in these conversations, we need to fill in the gaps of our individual knowledge. Everyone acknowledges that there's no easy answers, but I like to say that we can figure this out together. And that's the Bayou Culture Collaborative, and I'll share about that later. Part of what we say at every gathering is that we don't have the answers, but we can help together, we can help figure this out. And I also want to emphasize that everyone can influence this conversation and make an impact. You'll find out more about why I feel that way later on when I talk about some of the arts roles. I'm going to talk about quite a few resources, and there's actually a lot more that are in my full workshop. The Arts, Culture, and Migration resource list is online on the Louisiana Folklore Society, but parts of them that I'm speaking about today, just as Jessica said, she'll be dropping them in the chat. But if you don't catch something or you don't save the chat, all of this is online and on the resource list. I also developed a plan to plan for communities that I was asked to help one organization do. Everybody walk out with a strategic plan at the end of the workshop. And I said, well, that's not possible until everybody has a better understanding of the issues. So I developed a plan to plan, and that's also available. Some basics, just in case y'all are not aware of some of these. Mitigation and adaptation are thrown around, but in the climate world, words that you think you know and you're familiar with, they can frequently have a very specific definition. Mitigation is talking about stopping climate change. That's where most of the money and most of the conversation, things that you hear about in the news until very recently, most of it was about mitigation, stopping climate change. I solely focus on adaptation, learning to live with the changes, how to, whether or not it's slowed down or, changes in any way, we still have to deal with the impact. Now, both of these are necessary and they're not mutually exclusive. And the more you learn about this, the more you see that the Venn diagram has a lot of overlap, but it's important to understand those two basics. The other thing is the different types of disasters. Most of what you hear about especially from FEMA, is what's called fast onset disasters. And this is where, FEMA has at least two different categories in the agency. And most of it is in disaster response and recovery. That's the crisis of the tornado, the flood, the wildfire, the hurricane. That's not what I'm talking about today. That's all very important. And there is an arts role there. For example, helping people in evacuation centers for, weeks to not, to give them something to do and something else to think about. But that's not what I'm talking about today. I focus on the slow onset disasters. And within FEMA, this is their risk management program. This is, in the past, this got almost no attention, but this is changing. FEMA is definitely responding slowly to the new reality of drought, sea level rise, thawing, permafrost. So what are the role of the arts with slow onset disasters? I've been identified at last three, and I'm in our discussion groups. I hope y'all you may identify additional ones. We're all learning here. The first is increasing awareness and engaging the public. I combine these because they overlap so much. The second is in migration and relocation. And the third is participating in the community resilience conversation. So increasing awareness and engaging the public. I like to highlight and to give an example, a very concrete example, the work of Xavier Cortada in Florida. He's in the Miami area. And he created what he calls the Underwater Homeowners Association. So he created a series of paintings with numbers on them, and that indicates the sea level rise at that location under certain circumstances. Again, I don't get into all the different projections and predictions and such, because who knows what the future is going to be, even with all the scientific knowledge being applied to it. But homeowners can get copies of these paintings and put them in front of their house. And so this is an amazing way to help people understand that this applies to you too, because part of the challenge of this is helping people not only wake up, but keep remembering, because we all get back to our daily lives. The power of denial is very powerful. And so helping people just remember that this needs to be addressed is very challenging. Another concrete example is community quilts. The Rougarou Fest in Houma, Louisiana, is really highlighting a lot of the local issues. This is on the extreme coast. They're profoundly impacted. Hurricane Ida hit them a few years ago, quite profoundly. So a couple of years ago, they wanted to do a community quilt where they highlight the ghost trees. They're called ghost trees. Those are all the trees that are dying due to saltwater intrusions and sea level rise. So they had they worked with quilt designers and a quilting group, but in order to put it together, the piecing part of it, they had the community participate at the festival. And so then the quilting group finished it, and it now hangs at the this is all the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center, which is a science education organization that really focuses also on the culture, and they are one of the 5 partners in the Bayou Culture Collaborative. Previously, for a separate group, I commissioned instructions on doing this process, and that's all online. And so if you want to make technically it's not a quilt, it's a quilted wall hanging. And so if this is a process you want to consider, there are instructions on how to do this. So I want to spend most of the time on climate migration and relocation. This is where arts organizations and community organizations help both the newcomers and the long-term residents adjust, because both of them are going to be impacted, and it can be quite difficult. Just a little bit of basics about the migration. I go into it a lot more detailed in the workshops. This map shows all the counties in blue that are going to lose land eventually. All the red counties show where they're going to be moving to. And the darker the red, the more people. So some of this work has been done using tax IRS address changes, but we don't have time to go into that. There's a lot more to say about this. The other reason people move is the heat index. And quite honestly, this is the map that upsets me, because I really can't handle the heat. But all the counties in red are predicted to have a heat index of 125 on at least one day or more by the year 2053. And you'll notice that the data is from First Street Foundation. They are generating a lot of the data that other people are using to create some of the visuals and stories and investigate further. So, with all the horrible things that people are dealing with, housing, food insecurity, very serious issues, why worry about culture? And why be proactive? Well, the reason is there will be conflict between long-term residents and newcomers. I have heard one researcher that this says that this is not necessarily so, but I would like to see some case studies of this where large numbers of people come to a new community and there are no problems. After Hurricane Katrina, a lot of people from New Orleans came to Baton Rouge, where I am based, and there was definitely problems. Just the cultural differences just between two major cities in Louisiana were challenging. Another example is after Ida, a lot of people moved from down the bayous into Houma. Some of them moved only 10 miles, but yet there was conflict. This was a challenge. But the good news is there are cultural strategies to help newcomers and long-term residents adjust. And you know a lot of this toolkit already. You can draw on all of the creative economy research and the creative placemaking strategies. So you'll continue your strategies, but just through this lens. Now, you will have to adjust some planning strategies, which I'm going to go into. But the important thing is that what you do every day is often considered novel and innovative approaches by planners. Louisiana has over 400 festivals, and in some planning circles, they say they've discovered festivals and how this is this innovative approach, not realizing that festivals are across the country, and it's not really a new idea; it's just new to them. With creative placemaking, one of the things that you're well aware of is that first you have to inventory. And so cultural asset mapping is a key component. On the this is, I've seen frequently simply a list and doesn't provide really enough information to really do much with it without a whole lot of contextualization. And no doubt because the contracts don't allow for the amount of time it takes to really flush out all these lists. On the other extreme is the folk life survey. And that's where you interview individuals and document community events in much more detail. A lot of people push back on this strategy because of the amount of time and intensity that it takes. Personally, I think a hybrid strategy is needed. I think both can be done together and end up with a lot more benefit for the community. This is a slide I use for non-cultural groups or arts groups, where I introduce them the whole concept of artist community engagement projects and how they would find it. And I don't have to go into detail on, y'all know as much as I do on this, I'm sure. But one of the distinctive differences between the typical artist project or even artist community project is the need to co-create spaces that reflect identity. And that's emphasis on the that the process of starting and implementing and wrapping up an arts project is more important practically, or just as important as the process itself. So the community, the long-term residents and the newcomers have to be involved in selecting what's going to be done, how it's going to be done, and then creating the spaces is just as important to make sure that the communities feel welcome. And one of the challenges for a lot of people is say, oh, we're welcoming. Anybody's welcome here. And you may not be aware of your implicit biases or the languaging of how you're messaging about this, and not realize that some of what you're doing is actually exclusionary, that the hidden code that some people are hearing. So that's going to be very important in your planning. Another example, of course, is community murals. Again, this is novel to the planners, some planners, but I don't need to go into that. I want the groups that have really developed this the most are the immigrants and refugee groups, but then a lot of the cultural groups in your communities, they have culture schools, they have culture camps, cultural centers, community gardens, all of this based on using the arts and culture and traditions. And so there's a lot to learn from them. The other group to look to is the indigenous peoples. This is Monique Verdun with the United Home and Nation, who is a multimedia artist who has done all kinds of different things from film projects. But now she's very focused on the native plants, that especially those that have medicinal and other types of uses within her tribe. And one of her things is the native plants seed bank that she's doing. Here she's shown with an installation art piece that is, their houses were palmetto houses, not, the Southeast does not have teepees. So this is an installation art project that features the palmetto weaving, the palmetto house, at an event. To me, the most important document that I want you to take a look at is Art Place America's last field scan in 2020. It's called Bridging Divides, Creating Community, Arts, Culture, and Immigration. And here they present the 4 immigration goals and the art strategy to address that one. And we don't have time to go into detail, but I want to focus in on one that I thought was especially important. And that's that you need to elevate cultural traditions as assets. When you're talking about doing these community, artist community arts projects, it's important that you focus on an art form or tradition that are widely shared and can be more easily accepted. So this is not the time for master fiddling classes. They recommend foodways, traditional ecological knowledge, quilting and other fiber work, and storytelling. This is the 4 goals and strategies, but we're not going to have time to go into all of that. The other document that I recommend for the number of case studies in it, and Bridging Divides has many case studies that are wonderful, is The Art of Community, Creativity at the Crossroads of Immigration, Cultures, and Social Services. So this was back in 2006, and the Institute for Cultural Partnerships in Pennsylvania did this in order to connect social services with immigrant services. Laura Marcus Green, who is now at the South Carolina Arts Council, and Amy Skillman, which is at Goucher College, did this. And even though it's 2006, it's very relevant. It's just like Bridging Divides, where what they're recommending for immigrant communities can be equally applied to migrant communities. And here's an example from Art of Community. They point out that story circles, developed by Roadside Theater, is an excellent way to bring together people. they, this was developed to inform playwriting about a local community, but it can be, the processes can be adapted to other types of things too. Most recently, in just this year, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine published a consensus study report called Community-Driven Relocation: Recommendations for the U.S. Gulf Coast and Beyond. And this is to me, this is a landmark publication. They took about 3 years to do this. It's just been released. And very significantly, they wanted to stop using the various types. There are many things, many labels for the migration process. It started with managed retreat. There's horrible pushback on that, and we may have time for me to explain all of that. But they came up with community-driven relocation along with FEMA. FEMA has started talking about the need for the communities to be involved in decision-making. And so this permeates this document. Significantly, the most important recommendation report, the first recommendation is about mental health and the need to address that before they go into the larger issues of originating and receiving communities. And note that they have renamed, you may have heard of sending communities, and note that they are proposing that those communities be called originating, which is less offensive than many of the terms. Many of the terms that have been studies have come up with have actually ended up being offensive to the community members. So this is a very important and timely document. Another one that I want to suggest is the National League of Cities, What Cities Should Know About Climate Change and Populations on the Move. This was just in 2022, and you'll see that this was published just before the shift to originating communities, that they came up with vulnerable communities, but communities are finding that offensive too. They also have a third category of destination cities, which are the ones near the Great Lakes and such, that have the longest term. They have the most resources for all the changes that are happening, which is basically fresh water with the Great Lakes. Again, excellent case studies about, I think it's 7 cities and one area, Vermont. Very, very well done. But there's some things that you need to be aware of before you proceed, and that includes intersectionality, how to talk about migrations, the words, the jargon, and trigger words, and then trauma-informed care. Very, very important is taking on an intersectional viewpoint. Basically, planning should not be colorblind in order to not replicate past injustices. Hardy Dean was the lead author on a team. This was back in 2017, but it's still very timely and an important study. This map shows all the counties that will be facing flooding due to sea level rise. All the shaded counties have a higher percentage of African Americans than the national average. And so he directly addresses the need to be colorblind, because you're just going to replicate past injustices if you aren't. I highly recommend this article. Now, words. This can be an interesting conversation with community members. I've had people push back on some of this about code switching, but all of us code switch. All of us, some of us are just more aware of when and how to do it, or that we even do it. but there are words that trigger other people, and you may have no idea. And in South Louisiana, resilience is one of the worst. They're really tired of being told they need to be resilient. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more. Then I talked a little bit already about managed retreat has shifted to community-driven relocation. And then the different terms that have been applied to originating communities. I do want to say a little bit more about climate change and in what context you can use that. I'm so immersed in this that I kind of get amazed that there's still people who are totally resistant to the phrase climate change. And what they recommend, and I do too, is that you don't have to go to the why. You can just focus on the ramifications of it, the storms, the flooding, the increased intensity, the more tornadoes, the wildfires. So you don't even, if you are in that kind of setting, you don't even have to go there. And some people feel that that's wrong. I think it's just practical. It's what we need to do. A little bit more about resilience. The definition that's often used in planning is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness. And Jonathan Foray with the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center offered a different way to approach this, because in that area, again, there's a lot of resistance to individuals being asked to be resilient. He talked about tenacity, the determined to continue what you are doing, don't give up easily. Some researchers are saying that resilience shouldn't even be applied to the individual. That resilience is about systems. Systems need to be resilient, not individuals. And Lenore Curall, the tribal administrator for the United Home and Nations, said it best to me. Resilience is like a rubber band. It will pop if it isn't contracted some. And that just says so much right there. Concerning this languaging and how to go about having conversations, Climate Migration Network is a national organization that has published Lead with Listening. It's a guidebook for community conversations on climate migration. After you read this, you think, well, that's obvious. Well, the problem is that not everybody comes to this aware of some of these things. So some of this seems like common sense, but you can't assume that. They say that you must approach community members as experts of their lived experience and not tell them what they are feeling or have experienced. First, you listen, and then you lead with questions, and you gradually earn trust and build a relationship. This booklet even has exercises to use with groups, and it really needs to be used more across the country. The last thing that I want to make sure you are aware of before you proceed is trauma-informed care. This is a whole field within social work, psychology, and such. I'm not asking you to become a trauma-informed professional, but you need to become aware of trauma-informed approaches and have trauma-informed professionals involved in your planning and implementation of your projects if you choose to go to address these. For example, you really need to understand adverse childhood experiences, which is often simply referred to as ACEs. This is a very deep project issue. It has not, well, let's put it this way. The mental health conversation nationally is just getting more sophisticated. And one of the issues that the mental health community is dealing with is that we're not talking, it's not therapy that needs to happen, but more applying this to the public health approach for the communities. And a lot of individual therapists are not necessarily informed about how to deal with the community as opposed to the individual. This also relates to art therapy, all the different forms of art therapy, but again, on a community basis instead of simply an individual basis, because we're never going to have the resources for every individual to be in therapy. So the last role of the arts that I want to talk about is helping you participate in the community resilience conversation. FEMA is aware of the arts and culture and the need to connect. They published this booklet in 2021, The Guide to Expanding Mitigation, Making the Connection with the Arts and Culture. So this is informing your disaster and response organizations about the need to include you and how to connect with them. But, you know, making that connection, it takes more than simply publishing a booklet. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And again, what I have found is many of them find this very fascinating. What we do is very fascinating and welcome the conversation. Incorporating it might be more challenging, though. The most important thing that you can do is help increase awareness. And that's on your personal level and in your organization. Then simply starting the conversation. The way we did it in Louisiana was multifold, and I'm going to get a little bit more into the organization, the Bayou Culture Collaborative. But what I did was simply start connecting with the key organizations and sharing my concerns. I did it in a very, I was incredibly naive, even though I have lived here all my life. In graduate school in the 70s, we were talking about land loss and saltwater intrusion, but I had never gotten involved in the planning aspect. So this initiative has pushed me to have not only conversations, but relationship with other state agencies that I didn't even know existed in some situations. And after a point, they started reaching out to me. So and a very important conversation has slowly evolved over the past 5 or 6 years. Again, like what I've started to do here is help you learn about about adaptation and the jargon of the professionals, just so you understand what they're talking about. But there's a lot more to it. And then, like I said, understanding intersectionality and trauma-informed strategies, and then identifying the players. And again, all this is outlined in the plan to plan. Concerning identifying the players, you have state and federal agencies, nonprofits, and public sector entities. I thought the arts had a lot of nonprofits until I got into the environmental world. They beat us by far, and they're more resourced than we tend to be, though. How Louisiana responded was that the Louisiana Folklore Society started what we call the Bayou Culture Collaborative. The mission is to help people sustain their traditional cultures and to help people connect in the face of land loss and climate change. And the emphasis is on helping people connect. We're not telling them what to do, but we are a safe space for people to have all kinds of dialogues. So one of the most important things that and these are our partners. We have the Louisiana Folklore Society, 2 university centers, and the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center, and then the Folklife program within the Division of the Arts. One of the most important things that we do is have monthly online gatherings. And our next one is Friday, June 21st. It's always on a Friday at noon. This month is Jessica Dandridge, and all of them address the human dimension in public planning. She's going to talk about her the water justice and resilience strategies in New Orleans. And everyone's welcome there. The other thing we did that has been very powerful is we created a position statement. This was a 5-month process with 50 people participating and finally voting on it. And basically, we assert that the state must address the human dimension in environmental planning, including intentional strategies to support traditional culture and social ties to the physical environment. One of the strategies to support the originating communities is passing it on workshops where masters are paid to pass on their tradition within their community. Then there are the sense of place and loss workshops. We've experimented with several different formats. Before the pandemic, we had an in-person one, and the second one was scheduled for the day of the lockdown or the week of the lockdown. And then we went online, and we've found a lot of success in doing it online for accessibility issues. Yes, I'm aware of the digital divide, and that is definitely a concern, but trying to create this community of such a large region that people are able to participate by being online than they would to expect people to drive once a month. But the idea is to bring together the scientists, the environmentalists, the cultural people, and the policymakers, and they've been very powerful. These are our funders. I want to point out that this would not have been possible without funding from both the National Endowment for the Arts and the Louisiana Division of the Arts. They were willing to take a risk on this and just help let us explore and figure out how to do this. So now we can turn it back to Jessica. We're going to break into breakout groups. And the question is, how could your arts organization or you help address climate adaptation? So this is how to connect, and we can return to this. Well, it'll be posted in the in the chat.
Thank you for joining the breakout rooms and coming back. We have just a little bit left in this session, and we wanted to see if anyone wanted to share some of the things that were discussed, some ideas. You can put it in the chat, or if you want to come off mic, we can just sort of popcorn out some ideas.
I can jump in. I know we talked about that we all feel like we are being tasked with sort of advocating for this work going forward and some strategic planning in our organizations. So that I felt like that was really encouraging and interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, where are we as advocates for the work?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to say that I would love to hang out with my little breakout group for like another hour. That was really interesting. And I'll say I kind of dominated a little bit in our group, but I'd love to hear from my group again. That's all I would like to say there, but thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo. I mean, this really underscored the importance, I think, of the network that South Arts, by working, across so many states, put together. I mean, I think we quickly figured out how, the ones on our call can connect with the work that we're doing outside of this, and even, like the connections and how important it is. I mean, so I'm in Atlanta. You can get so isolated in your own community, and how great it is to hear from people who are working in other communities, but even in disciplines that are kind of tangential to yours. So thank you so much for doing this. And Kale, it's great to see you. Are you in Atlanta? Aren't you a photographer?
Yes, yeah, I'm a
that I
photographer.
used to
I'm in
know through
Texas now.
ACP.
Yes, nice to see you.
Hi.
Hi.
That's
I
great.
want, I
Yeah.
want to add that one thing I forgot to say on one of the slides that is that a lot of arts organizations are already doing all the above. And I want to do a major shout out to Camille, who's on the call, with a studio in the woods. They were doing this way before most groups, and their artist residencies, many of them, or practically most of them, have been environmentally focused. So this is not new. This is not, there's a lot to draw on and network with and learn from each other. But yes, Camille, thank you. That's Camille Hill Prewitt.
I wanted to say I'm Srimati Maharaj from the city of St. Petersburg. And in our group, first of all, I want to thank you. It's almost like you're bringing these things, items and aspects to our awareness, even the use of the word resilient and resiliency. That, I mean, an overused word. And the intent is pure, meaning that you've been struck by a shock and you're able to bounce back and you're here. And that says a lot. And that's what we mean by when that word is used. But it goes over so many spectrum and aspects, you know, the environment, society, personal resiliency. So it was very interesting to hear that. I thought also the fact when you brought, you know, that when you think about, when you talked about art, my mindset in terms of resiliency and all of this, I was thinking in terms of structures, buildings. And there are these whole other aspects in terms of the entire culture. That was a huge awareness for me. I know I missed one of them, you know, but you got to talk about foodways, quilting, storytelling. I don't remember number 4, you know.
Traditional ecological knowledge.
Okay, traditional ecological knowledge. That was a big one, but that's so important, you know. So that just bringing the awareness of all of this was very, very important to us and how we talk and how we look. Another huge part of this is the new communities, the migrants and the immigrants. So often that could be taken for granted. And when you talk about the ACES, that's the childhood experience. What is it again, ACE?
Adverse childhood experiences.
Correct. And this is coming because we don't know what experience that migrant yet.
No, it's not coming, it's here.
Well, yeah, what I mean, it's coming with that individual.
Right.
It's with that individual in your community.
And basically, like in the most easy to understand experiences, you're in the evacuation center and you're talking with someone, you know, they've lost their home, they've had to leave it. You have no idea how many layers of trauma are standing in front of you. And so we all need to become more aware of that and learn more about how to interact with somebody, because it's not just today's trauma. They may have many different levels of trauma.
Coming as a migrant, and we see that, right? From all worldwide, be it Europe, be it South America and everywhere. There is, and that's whole idea of childhood experiences is now advocated in research and medicine, that is what, you know, triggers most of our illnesses. But it's important for us to understand that when we're suggesting, you know, things to individuals in the community, you got to take how are they perceiving it and how are they processing it. That was very important, you know, something that you brought up, extremely important for us. Our group had a lively discussion, and one of our members is from Miami. He is an IT, and he was just very curious to listen to what this was all about. And Sean, if you're listening, please feel free to talk. His mother had fled from Louisiana, and they fled to another place in terms of Columbia, South Carolina. But his experience for them, that's the childhood experience that, that experience that he talks about, and they fled. Another thing that I got from you in what you're saying is that when a shock occurs, don't leave, because the grass may seem greener on the other side, and it's not what it's all meant to be. And that's where that community needs to prepare some sort of area, have some process in place so that.
Okay, I want to qualify that. Yes, some people, quote, should be leaving because of that gets into levels of risk. And that's well developed within the planning world, is assessing just how vulnerable the communities are and their risk level. So if you're living on a barrier island,
yes,
that's completely different
yes,
from whether or not you're living even 50 miles inland.
yes,
Baton Rouge is nowhere near the coast in our perception, but we still have been hit horribly by hurricanes. So
right.
it's everything is relative, especially
Thank
risk.
you. And thank you for qualifying that, because what I meant to say is that after you've gone through that and you're still in that spot, maybe in a shelter or something, maybe, the first thing is to flee, but look at where you are and what's available. So thank you very much for qualifying that. Thanks again. This was eye-opening.
Thank you. We have a few questions that came up in the chat. When we still have several minutes left. I'm happy to read those. Let me go and scroll back up. This one is about, there was a reminder that colorblind is a fraught term that can be used against racial consciousness and diversity work. And that was just a comment, and yes, we've heard that before, folks saying, well, I'm colorblind, I don't see color, and, and that can feel dismissive as well.
And somebody else mentioned about trigger words. Who's being triggered? That's really complicated, and it's very like in South Louisiana, when I do these workshops, I've had people have anxiety attacks just talking about hurricanes because they've been in 4 hurricanes in 3 years or something. So there, in that setting, just hurricanes can be a trigger word. But yeah, that's a very complicated conversation that, quite honestly, I'm not qualified to necessarily lead because of all the layers. The intersectionality is immensely complicated, and I'm still learning about all this. For example, after one of my presentations, someone said that I really shouldn't refer to master artist, that is insensitive. And I forget sometimes.
Wow.
And simply not refer to tradition bearers instead of masters,
And earlier in your presentation, Maida, you had mentioned, listening, and I think that's an important part of that as well, is listening to what the community is telling you and listening to what individuals are saying and responding to that accordingly. I know when folks were in the breakout sessions, we had a conversation about the word resiliency. And I'm sure many of us are maybe familiar with the memes about, please stop calling me resilient. I don't want to be resilient anymore. It's exhausting. And then the great point about resiliency, coming back to as it was before. And I had a great professor who's done a lot of work in this area. And, sometimes the way we were before is what got us to where we are now. And so Maida and I were talking about, how do we get people to thriving?
And that's
I-
starting to become, I just saw a NASA, National Academy of Sciences presentation about the need to let go of trying to get back to what was and to imagine how we can be even better. And one of the key ways is to stop building in at-risk
Hmm.
wetlands. That
Hmm.
in Louisiana, we still have subdivisions being developed, put in the wetlands with a levee and a retention pond. And it's like, we need to move beyond that and accept that we will not be going back to what we were. And some people agree with that, but yet getting the developers to not do that is part of the challenge.
May I ask a question? When Jessica, you said that individuals were actually getting anxiety attack when the resiliency was used because they've been through 4 or more hurricanes. Are they really saying to us, we're tired, we need help, I need help, and they're not, that individual help?
Absolutely. Definitely. It's just the idea, and I see that there's some social workers on the call and making comments, so please chirp in if you want to. The task is so overwhelming, especially in areas that are already, the coastal areas that are already have been impacted so much. But the wildfires have caused similar problems in the West. The extreme precipitation is kind of what worries me the most, because how do you predict extreme precipitation? They just come out of nowhere. So anyway, I would love to hear from some of the social workers that if they're still here.
Not a social worker, but dance artist professor trained in trauma-informed movement care.
Oh.
And yeah, really thinking a lot about feeling safe in the body. And when an audience member or student or someone that you're giving a presentation to has no safety in the body, the difficulty at even hearing, not just listening, but hearing what is being said is extreme. And so even in the way that we present materials, we're going to need to figure that out, because as there are more and more extreme experiences that happen to people and their bodies feel thoroughly unsafe, like if your house gets blown off of you or your yard gets washed away and you feel thoroughly unsafe in your body, and rebuilding a trust in your I like to call it your earth suit is the first thing that needs to happen. But if you've ever experienced the land letting go of itself or not being able to withstand some other force impacting it, that's really, really difficult to do and takes like incremental steps towards creating the conditions. You can't make them safe, but you can create the conditions where they can explore what safety might feel like. That may be as simple as, instead of talking about 3 major things that you need to get across, you're only going to talk about one thing in 5 different ways. Or talking about the one thing across several different sessions, which as a professor, that's really like, how do I get through all of the stuff I'm supposed to do? I've been sitting here thinking about policymakers, not so much developers, but policymakers. Something that you said earlier, Maida, about planners just discovering idea festivals and being super gung ho about, oh, look, we could do it this way. What will it take, or how can the artist be instrumental in bringing forward this idea of community care? Because in a way, when you're citing a new work, you're having to express community care just to understand if my work will work with this group. Can I just show up and say these things? Can I use these colors? Can I use this rhythm? Can I do it at this tree? Do I have to be inside? Do I have to be outside? Who should I talk to first? All of those things ethnographers know how to do, marketers know how to do, artists know how to do. How can artists help policymakers learn how to do this?
The most important thing is to show up. Is find out what you, and quite honestly, once I started putting myself out there and having this conversation, I've been invited to so many of their meetings. Because for one thing, you're the new novel speaker that they haven't heard before, you know. But you just simply put yourself out there and host them. Now, the Bayou Culture Collaborative having monthly Zooms, and I didn't go into the fact that we have 5 working groups, you know, that we've started doing in-person things since the pandemic's over, you know, to churn it. But basically, you put together panels, you have community conversations, whether it's Zoom or in person, but just get out there and talk about it. That's probably the most important thing you can do.
May I just go back? Dr. Gabor Mate, researcher, medical doctor, has done, and psychologist, has done a lot of research on childhood trauma and the impacts and the AC that you talked about. But in addition, talks about how do you get this trauma out. And Anna, when you talk about what you do, you're in that space to do that, because movement and dance and that is one of the ways you can do that. So if you talk to it means getting back, as you said, to some other steps at lower level to help to make that movement, and then these traumas eventually will rise up. During that process, I mean, it's like meditating or yoga. These issues, they come up and you don't even know it, but they come up at that time during that process. And Dr. As I said, Gabe Matoa is, if you read his book, he is really good. I think The Myth of Perfect, I think that's the name, but it's got a lot of stuff on YouTube.
Thank you
The
for
myth of
sharing that.
the myth of normal.
We have just a few moments left, and I wanted to go ahead and wrap up so we can give that time back to you all. I want to say thank you again to Maida for her time, her energy, and intentionality in putting this presentation together. You know, it feels like there's a long way to go in this journey, but I really appreciate the time that has gone into this work, and what you see in these slides is her learning and her energy and her interest to share. And so thank you, Maida, for being here.
And what I want to leave y'all with is that the importance of the arts getting involved. And I glanced at some of the comments, and I like Camille's comment about how scientists that never would respond in the past are now begging, you know, for participation in the arts. The arts has an incredibly important role in this, because we can reach people who will never read a report or study a graph. I can't emphasize enough the importance that culture and the arts have in this conversation.
It's definitely something that, you know, for South Arts, we just adopted a new strategic plan, and climate change, climate mitigation, climate adaptation. Those are topics that have definitely come up, and especially considering that Bridgespan, who helped us with our strategic plan, did a lot of interviewing. And so, this is something that has been top of mind for a lot of staff members. And so it's great to see from an organizational standpoint, the interest in this work. It will affect us all. It is affecting us now. And I think about, my granddaughter, and by the time, she's, I think in her golden years, some of the effects of climate change will have been exacerbated, and that's sad. It's sad for me. But the hope is that we are creatives, that we are working towards this and helping people also come to solutions for how we deal with climate change. So thank you all for being here. And I will do a follow-up email and include a link to the recording as well, and the slides again, and of course the resources that Maida put together and shared with us. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and come back for more sessions. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.